From the Spec Network, this is Fragmented, an Android developer podcast where we talk about building good software and becoming better Android developers. I'm Don Felker.
And I'm Kaushik Gopal.
Welcome to the show.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the podcast. Thanks again for joining us. Again, I know we say this a lot, but Kaushik and I really appreciate you taking the time to listen to us chat and ramble on about random things around Android development. So thanks again for taking the time to be with us today. Today we're going to have a little episode, a little mini fragment on a topic that's been very interesting to me. And it's been very useful. It's a library that I use, and that library is actually called AutoDispose. So we're going to talk about what AutoDispose is, why you would want to use it, and how you can go ahead and implement it, and some of the things that I've done when working with it. So first, let's initially start off with what is AutoDispose. AutoDispose is a library built by the team over at Uber. So if you go to github.com/uber/AutoDispose, it is basically automatic binding and disposal of RxJava 2 streams. So some of you may be scratching your head of like, well, what does that even mean? Well, basically, let's think about some common situations in which we would like to use RxJava. We maybe are communicating with a API endpoint, or we're tracking a bunch of gestures on the screen, or various different things are happening, and we're using RxJava to do that. Now, as you know, we need to, if we subscribe to an observable, then we need to make sure that we are disposing of that properly. Otherwise, we can introduce memory leaks quite easily in RxJava, especially in the context of Android. We can leak all different kinds of stuff. So that could be a topic all in itself, but the main issue is a lot of times we forget to actually dispose of things. We may be writing the code. You'll type in a particular thing saying, all right, I want to subscribe to this. And then on the next iteration of this, whatever is emitted, I want to perform some type of operation. And if you're using libraries like the Arrow Kotlin library, then you could be doing some, fold operators and all different kinds of stuff. And what ends up happening, I've found in my experience, is that I'll be writing this code, and then all of a sudden I'll kind of build everything out, and I'm like, all right, cool, this works exactly how I want it. Maybe I've even written an espresso test for it, or whatever kind of test for this, and then it works. I'm like, all right, great, and I push it up, and I push up a pull request, and then all of a sudden I realize when I'm looking at my own diff that, great, I did not even set up a disposable for that subscription. Now that could be a single disposable, it could be a composite disposable. And very often these things are very easy to miss because you're just reading the code and it makes sense. Okay, we're going to subscribe to this stream. We're going to do this. Then this is going to happen. Okay, that makes sense. And you're thinking logically about what the app's doing. And it's really easy sometimes to miss that. Oh, you didn't return a disposable and you're not cleaning up after yourself in regards to RxJava. That could be a memory leak that we're going to expose right there. It could be big, could be large. Again, that depends on your situation. And this is kind of where AutoDispose comes in here and helps out for basically scoping disposal and cancellation of Rx2 Java streams. That's very, common. What we'll normally do in this situation without something like AutoDispose is, again, we'll set up a disposable wherever we subscribe to it, and then in the on-stop of an activity or whatever, or fragment, etc., wherever you're using, you may decide, hey, at this point, I want to unsubscribe if you're using like RxJava 1, or you're going to dispose in RxJava 2. Now, one important note here, I did say RxJava 1 there. This library AutoDispose is for RxJava 2. So if you're using RxJava 1, can't use this yet, but I will make a mention of a library that you can use that might kind of help you start migrating over to RxJava 2. But hopefully you're on RxJava 2. So again, this is RxJava 2. So you're going to have a disposable and you forgot to dispose that. Now you could be using, like I said, a regular disposable, or you could be using a composite disposable. So that's kind of what the situation that we normally encounter in regular RxJava 2 land is. AutoDispose makes this a lot easier because we don't have to actually manage those, the cancellations and the disposables ourselves. What we can actually do is have an observable. We can, perform our other operations on it, such as, we're going to do flat maps, and we're going to do other types of things on the observable. And then what we'll actually say when we're using the AutoDisposable library, and you've added it to Gradle, etc., you'll say .as AutoDisposable, and then you'll pass in a provider. And this is the provider that you want to use as the scoping mechanism for it to dispose of something. Now, the documents actually on the website are, they seem, in my opinion, kind of incomplete because it was hard to follow. Actually, I had to go take a look at a few examples, but once I saw the example, it was very easy. I'll post it in the show notes for you to how I'm currently doing it. So anyway, you can do observable dot, flat map or whatever, or you could just say your regular observable dot AutoDispose this and then dot subscribe. And then what that will do, will basically automatically attach a type of a listener, if you want to think about it. It's a provider, actually. It's a scope provider to say, hey, when this particular type of event happens in the scope, then we want to go ahead and dispose of something. So now out of the box, there are other ones out of the box that you can use. And the one that you're mainly going to use right out of the gate when you're first working with this is going to be the Android Lifecycle scope provider, most likely. And so, for example, what I'll have here is I'll have an observable. I might say observe on the main thread. I'll say AutoDispose, the AutoDisposable, and then I'll pass in the scope provider. And the scope provider will then be a type of provider that we're going to use. And what you can use right out of the box is there's the Android Lifecycle scope provider. And then what you need to do is pass it an instance of basically a lifecycle owner. And that lifecycle owner is going to be perhaps a fragment, going to be an activity or something like that. And then what that will do is it'll tell AutoDispose that, hey, well, you know what you need to do is while this stream is doing whatever it's doing, if something happens, I want you to go ahead and cancel and dispose of this when a particular event happens. So for example here, I'm looking at the source code as I talk right now. This is the Android Lifecycle scope provider. This is the scope that is going to happen. And what it's going to say, hey, is, you know what, if the last event that happened was on create, then I want you to basically, we're going to AutoDispose on destroy. If the last event that happened was on start, then we want to do it on stop. If it was on resume, we'll do on pause. If it was on pause, we'll do on stop, and then et cetera, et cetera. And you can actually take a look at the source code again. This is just the Android Lifecycle scope provider.java. This is in the AutoDispose library. It's given to you for free. So it's real easy to use. I'm again looking at the source code I have now. I'm basically saying the observable dot as AutoDisposable, passing in the lifecycle scope provider because I need a scope provider, and pass in the lifecycle owner, which is going to be the fragment or whatever, or anything of that instance itself. So that's pretty easy. Now that's how you're going to do it in typical Java land. Now thankfully this also works very well with Kotlin. Now in Kotlin it's actually a little bit easier, and I've kind of slipped up a couple of times when I said this. And you can actually use something called .AutoDisposable. So you can say, whatever my observable is, .AutoDisposable, pass in the lifecycle scope provider, and this could be the Android lifecycle scope provider, and you could say it would then automatically see that scope, and then you can subscribe to it, do whatever you want to do. Now this is basically some syntactic sugar, which makes it real nice, and basically creates a lifecycle scope provider and does everything for you fairly easily. So it's just a couple of less keystrokes, a lot easier to do inside of Kotlin. So let's talk about these scope providers for a second. So inside of the documentation, they say a scope provider is an abstraction that allows objects to expose and control and provide their own scopes. It's particularly useful for objects with simple scopes, so basically stop when I stop, or very custom state that requires custom handling. So there's, you can build your own scope provider. Thankfully, I haven't really had to do that yet with anything that I'm working with, because the basic Android stuff is usually what I'm looking for. However, there are some instances where maybe the typical scope provider is not what you need. So I'm going to hop back over to the code here, and I'm looking at it here. There is other providers that are out there as well. And so, for example, we have, I think it's the view scope provider I'm going to look at here. Typing it as I talk here to double check it. Yep. It's called the view scope provider that provides scoping for Android view classes. So you can actually provide the scope for those views. Maybe you're using custom views, you need to subscribe, do some stuff inside of there. That's kind of built for you. There's also other providers that are built for you as well, such as the test lifecycle scope provider. So this is very interesting. What I have found useful is sometimes I need to provide scope kind of injected or inside of my class. So I need to know what scope provider to use. And so maybe I'll provide that via a method. So when I perform a method, I'll say, hey, here's a scope provider I want you to use, because maybe I have a service class that's not directly inside of a activity or fragment, but it's somewhere kind of in the middle of my hierarchy. But I need a scope provider. And so what I'll do is I'll just pass in a Lifecycle scope provider or some type of scope provider in itself. And inside of my application, I might use the Android Lifecycle scope provider. And inside of test, I might use the test Lifecycle scope provider so I can make sure my tests execute correctly and so forth. So there's various different types of Lifecycle scope providers that you could use. You could also build your own and so forth and so forth. And I mean, just general scope providers that you could have on your own. So now let's talk about it again. How does this work? Just to recap here, when we have the AutoDispose library in our application and we're using it, and we're using in Java.as AutoDispose, we pass in the scope provider, or in Kotlin would be .AutoDisposable, we pass in the scope provider. What would happen is I could just do that directly inside of the class that I'm working in. And then what would happen is, based upon everything that's in AutoDispose, it would say, hey, it looks like for some reason the activity or the fragment has now stopped. I'm going to go ahead and cancel this and auto-dispose of this for you. So it makes it a lot easier for you to manage your subscriptions much more easily. Now, one of the other cool things that you can do is you can also tell AutoDispose, like, hey, you know what? I actually only want you to dispose on this particular event here. So here's the lifecycle owner. So when I'm creating my Android lifecycle scope provider, I'm going to use that again. I can say android.lifecycleprovider.from, and this is how I create an instance of it. I can either just say, hey, here's the lifecycle owner, and it's going to give me the kind of the default, the standard ones, or I can provide like an override for it and say, hey, here's the lifecycle owner I want to use, and hey, here is the event of when the scope is valid until. So maybe I really don't want it to end on pause for whatever reason. I want it to wait till like on destroy. I maybe have some certain things that need to happen and I need to control that. AutoDispose allows you to control that on a per call basis if you would like, which is very, very useful. There's a whole bunch of other things you can have in here. There's boundary resolvers, which you can spend a lot more time into. But in short, it makes life a whole lot easier for you to work with RxJava 2 streams. And it's just literally as simple as adding a few lines to your build.gradle file. What I recommend you doing if you're interested in this is actually go to the github.com/uber/autodispose. Take a look at the sample. They have a sample inside of here, and it shows you how AutoDispose kind of works with a couple of samples. And you can kind of take a look at the various implementations. They have Kotlin and Java and so forth. So they have ones where you're going to dispose with a view. They're going to show you how to implement basic different types of events and so forth with different scopes. They have ones for view models, activities, fragments, view holders. So all these different types of things where you may end up using RxJava 2, where it's very common that you would use it. They kind of give you some examples of how to implement these different types of things, which is awesome, makes it fantastic. They also kind of have some other examples inside of here, how you're going to build a view holder maybe on Java with AutoDispose and all over the place. So great to see the two implementations are in Java and in Kotlin, which is fantastic. And just as a fun little side note, something I literally just found out probably about an hour ago when I was on Twitter, is that one of the folks who works at Uber, which is Zach Sweers, has a test project, I would call it. It's called Ketchup. It's not like the ketchup you put on your fries. It's like CATCHUP, ketchup. Like I want to catch up on, some work or catch up on, what's been changing. And he's used this project as kind of a place where he can test out ideas. And, we all kind of have those test projects, but Zach has done quite a bit with it. And this is actually where AutoDispose kind of came out of, which was very interesting to learn this morning. So I'll be sure to provide a link to Ketchup as well, so you can go ahead and check out that repository that Zach has so kindly created. Thanks again, Zach, for that. And thanks again for the folks over at Uber for creating AutoDispose. So to recap, if you're looking of a good and easy way to make sure that you're not leaking any memory inside of RxJava 2 and how to make your code a little bit cleaner, a little bit more testable, and kind of just easier to use in regards to RxJava 2, take a look at AutoDispose. That's at github.com/uber/AutoDispose. Make yourself a happier developer by just slapping on another method call, just chaining it on there, .AutoDisposable, and let the magic happen for you. Again, thanks for listening, and we'll catch you on the next episode.
That's it for the show, folks. Fragmented is hosted by Donn and me, Kaushik Gopal. We edit and produce all the episodes here on Fragmented. Sarah the Amazing Jackson from the Spec Network helps with production assistance and wraps our final mix. Our theme and ad music is by the national recording artist Blueprint from Weightless Recordings. You can find more Fragmented episodes at fragmentedpodcast.com. Thanks for listening, and we will catch you in the next episode.